Welcome to Blaze News, the mandate day 8. I'm Jill Savage. A Blaze News report reveals that VIP gold-top helicopter flights are common in the airspace where the fatal collision between a Black Hawk and an American Eagle flight took place, leaving us to wonder what caused the crash. An NBC News investigation discovered that a supervisor at the Reagan National Airport let an air traffic controller leave his shift early on Wednesday night, meaning that one air traffic controller was doing two jobs, monitoring airplanes and helicopters in the area. Authorities have not yet released the name of the soldiers aboard the Black Hawk, but many had speculated that Joe Ellis, a Black Hawk pilot who identifies as a transgender, was among the victims, but that claim has since been debunked. The delay in releasing the names is likely due to the Department of Defense's protocol, which requires 24-hour waiting period after notifying the next of kin of the deceased military members. Representative Brandon Gill weighed in on the FAA hiring people with severe psychological problems. Take a look.
The FAA has prioritized hiring people with severe psychological disabilities, with psychiatric problems, and with physical and mental issues. That is straight from the FAA. Now, the question is, do you want people with severe psychological problems being involved in any respect at all with planes landing at DCA or any other airport, or do you want the people at the FAA to be the most highly qualified people imaginable? That's what I want. That doesn't seem to be what the other side of the aisle wants.
President Trump recently made headlines for suggesting that DEI had something to do with the helicopter crash after he signed an executive order banning DEI from the federal government. Representative Corey Mills has since introduced a bill aiming to bolster Trump's order. The bill, titled DEI to DIE Act, would eliminate all DEI environmental justice equity programs in the federal government. In light of the fatal plane crash and Trump's assertion that DEI was behind it, mainstream media claimed that Trump lacked evidence from this claim. However, even Democratic Senator Murray sounded the alarm concerning hiring practices at the FAA all the way back in 2014.
The FAA has added a new test to screen candidates they call the biographical questionnaire. Well, I'm hearing from our CTI schools in my state, in Washington State, that they are very worried about their graduates. And I'm hearing from the graduates as well. One CTI graduate from Washington State graduated with high honors, passed an FAA test for initial qualification, has almost 5 years of service in the Air Force, and a commercial pilot certificate with an instrumental rating. That young man took this biographical questionnaire and failed it for reasons that are very unclear.
Meanwhile, Representative Thomas Massie introduced a one-sentence bill to eliminate the Department of Education. The bill simply says the Department of Education shall terminate on December 31st, 2026. So why should we kill the Department of Ed? Well, for one thing, students haven't recovered from the pandemic shutdowns of 2020. Reading scores have dropped from 2022 to 2024 with the worst results since the program began back in 1992. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt brought this up in her press conference earlier today.
The nation's report card was released this week, and the news is not good. It showed that U.S. students had record low reading comprehension scores last year. It's National School Choice Week, and in part of the president's commitment to education, he just left a roundtable in the Roosevelt Room focused on this issue with leaders from across the country. The national report card showed that 70% of 8th graders were below proficient in reading, and 40% of 4th graders did not even meet the basic reading levels. This is completely unacceptable to the president, and he continues to take aggressive actions to address this education problem in our country.
And the White House is already getting started on promoting school choice. Earlier today, it hosted a roundtable with Republican governors just 2 days after President Trump signed an executive order directing his administration to, quote, expand education freedom for America's families. Leavitt also confirmed that Trump is following through with his threat of increased tariff levied against countries that he believes are ripping off the United States.
The president will be implementing tomorrow a 25% tariffs on Mexico, 25% tariffs on Canada, and a 10% tariff on China for the illegal fentanyl that they have sourced and allowed to distribute into our country, which has killed tens of millions of Americans. These are promises made and promises kept by the president.
In other news, remember when Roe versus Wade was overturned and dozens of workplaces scrambled to pay for their female employees to get out-of-state abortions? Well, the Pentagon was one of those, but not anymore. The Trump administration nixed this policy this week in a memo. And how are Democrats reacting to all of these changes? Well, House Minority Leader Representative Hakeem Jeffries tried to rally Americans with this call to action. Take a look.
We are going to fight it. Legislatively, we are going to fight it in the courts, and we're going to fight it in the streets.
The White House has called upon Jeffries to apologize for his threat of violence earlier this morning. President Trump is making good on his promises to dismantle the bureaucratic rot that has crippled our institutions for years. From cracking down on DEI policies to shaking up federal agencies, his administration is wasting no time restoring common sense and accountability. And all of this has left the left scrambling to maintain control. So be mindful of the street communists that will be eager to carry out these requests because they know the momentum has shifted. The American people are demanding results, not excuses, and President Trump is delivering. Now let's bring in Blaze News Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson. So there's a lot of talk of DEI and the concerns that are going on with that. And I like that one thing that we've seen is Trump has not only taken an executive order on this, but now members of Congress are acting to actually implement this into law so it can't be undone.
Yeah, so the work of many people who were very brave over the last, 4 or 5 years, really over the last 20 years, but who's counting? Really over the last 40 years, but who's counting? The work of many people, especially over the last few years, to really create an alternative revolution, a counter-revolution, weapons, and actually come out and say how bad this stuff is all paying off now. And so the dam is sort of burst open. It is now mainstream on the right. Everyone understands. And think of all the orators, let's call them, the great speakers on this. I mean, Vivek is going back to Ohio, but he was very good in talking about this. A lot of people love the way he spoke to this issue. Think of Chris Rufo and everything that he did. Just a great compatriot over the years, just even knowing him a little bit, the Italian assassin, I call him. I mean, he really made this a mainstream issue, attacked companies, attacked government, attacked the president of Harvard University. Now, you had a lot of people in tech who actually were able to come out and start talking about it. So, what you're seeing is really the result of that work. And now the dam has burst open. And there's a lot of people in Congress with the courage to actually take this on.
What do you make of Hakeem Jeffries in his comments earlier today saying that we'll go fight them in the streets? It harkened back to a time of Maxine Waters for me. Oh, yeah.
But I wonder, how possible it is. I mean, I think it would take a while to get back to, they have to rev up their emotions, because right now it really seems like most of them are just like, you read the Reddit boards. I was talking with this with friends on a chat the other day. We have Julio Rosas is out there listening to those crazy types. He's waiting for, the riots. He'll parachute in and be filming them for all of you. But the energy just isn't there right now. I mean, it's almost like they're just retreating to safe spaces,
I look at the news right now, and there were so many things that we just have already covered on the show today. There are still things that we didn't get to yet today. Top FBI officials were told to resign or they're going to be fired within the next few days. The USDA has been ordered to scrub all climate change references from their website, and federal employees must remove pronouns from their bio by the end of the day.
No, this is real. This is real stuff. It's actually happening, and it's going to take a while to really get rid of it, though, because you have to understand how many people are seeped in it, right? An entire legal and employment system has been set up in both the private and public sector, an entire HR regime, right, based on this garbage. So it's not going to go away right away. You have generations of people being taught this in the schools. The schools are still, by the way, they're our next target. We're coming for you next. We're going to take the NGO money and the education money away from these people because that's the source of it. They're still there. And look, all these people are still there. But the difference is culturally, like that damn burst. And now all of a sudden, all these people are taking various kinds of action, which we need because no one of these is a magic bullet. It's going to take a while.
Yes, we will continue to look at all the action coming up because Chris Bedford will have an exclusive interview with Congressman Chip Roy just ahead. Well, we know now we can see increased tariffs with our trade partners, all the tax cuts and regulation changes, and you need to learn why gold is a viable diversification tactic now more than ever. Birch Gold is releasing their ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era, and Donald Trump Jr. wrote the foreword. So if you want your free copy, along with Birch Gold's free information kit on gold, text my name, Jill, to the number 989898. We know that the national debt continues to increase. Our interest payments on the national debt continue to increase. So gold is still your hedge against a weakening dollar. Birch Gold can help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in gold. Just text Jill to 989898 for your free copy for the ultimate guide for gold in the Trump era. There's no obligation ever from them. You're only going to get information. They have an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and countless 5-star reviews and happy customers all over. You too can trust Birch Gold. Text my name, Jill, to the number 989898 today. What will the FBI look like in the Trump administration? Blaze Media senior editor for politics, Chris Bedford, asked Representative Chip Roy what he wants to see from Kash Patel if he's confirmed to lead the Bureau. Take a look.
Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you, Chris. How are you?
Fantastic. Not enjoying Texas. I'm stuck in the swamp, although at least the weather's a little better than it has been recently. Were you able to catch the hearings that we've had on yesterday? The basically the last series of contentious hearings, in particular on Kash Patel.
So today I've been, in Texas visiting with folks, but I saw the hearing with Bobby Kennedy. I think he did a great job swatting back on Bernie Sanders, a bunch of others. Obviously, Kash had his hearing today. I've been getting updates throughout the day. And, I think he did a pretty good job, from what I understand, of pushing back on what were clearly a kind of coordinated attacks by the Democrats. I mean, pulling up old photos because he goes on a photo line with somebody and trying to accuse them of being racist and things like that is just absurd. But those are the kinds of things you expect out of our Democratic colleagues, who didn't even show up, by the way, to Russ Vought's hearing over for OMB today, which is just, ridiculous. So, look, it was unanimous, 11-0 vote to get Russ Vought out of the committee. So I hope it'll be similar for Kash. They need to move him out quickly.
Exactly. And I know the Senate is overseeing the confirmations, but in the end, with your seat on House Judiciary, you'll be overseeing and actually trying to get answers. For the last couple of years, you've been trying to get answers out of the Department of Justice. On the FACE Act, for example, your legislation trying to get to the bottom of why the Democrat DOJ has been targeting pro-lifers while ignoring pro-abortion terrorism against crisis pregnancy centers and a host of other different problems. Have you had any contact with Kash or with any of his people that would give you some kind of make you feel that you're going to finally get to the bottom of some of these things, get the answers that you've been seeking for the last 4 years from the DOJ?
Yeah, well, Kash and I have a lot of mutual friends, and I know him. I've been leaving him alone. He's got to get through the confirmation hearing. But once he gets through and once he gets confirmed, which I expect him to be, we'll certainly be in contact about what needs to be changed at the FBI. And notably, you pointed out what's been going on with the FACE Act prosecutions, which, of course, is both a Department of Justice broader problem with the prosecutions and what they do through the prosecutors there in the U.S. attorney's offices, but also with respect to the FBI. We had all of these individuals who 97% of the FACE Act prosecutions were against pro-life individuals. We've had, individuals put in jail. In Texas, a 75-year-old woman in bad health who was put in jail, who thankfully was pardoned by the president along with 20 others. But we need to reverse that, repeal the FACE Act, but importantly, put reforms in place for the FBI when what they've been doing with their abuses, not just with respect to the FACE Act, but obviously FISA, as well as what they were doing in coordination with the Department of Justice with the J6 individuals. We had doors getting knocked down, individuals in my district that were getting arrested, literally, that had their doors knocked down, way after the events occurred. We had 2 grandmas who were arrested going from Austin out to Fredericksburg in the Hill Country last year for what occurred on January 6th. So I'm glad the president has, pardoned those individuals. It was a politicized process. The FBI needs to be reformed from top to bottom. It needs to be focused on working with local law enforcement to root out organized crime, to root out cartels, to stop sex trafficking, to stop the dangerous flow of narcotics, to stop the flow of fentanyl, not to be used to go after so-called terrorism and then be used to target Americans in the name of rooting out terrorism. That's just wrong.
You've been on the J6 prosecutions for a long time, where a lot of other Republicans kind of took a step back. They seemed afraid of being able to actually talk about it. And after the pardons, you actually personally went down to the D.C. jail, where the releases were slower than they really ought to have been. Are you at this point now satisfied with the Department of Justice and the different prisons that they've actually listened to the order, or are there still languishing issues?
There's still languishing issues. I mean, some have been released. I mean, that day we went down, I think 3 more were released. I think a few more have been released, and we need to follow up. My staff's been working with Eli Crane and Scott Perry and Lauren Boebert and others that were down there that day, and generally to try to make sure that these individuals are freed up. I know there's been some real problems with some of the individuals involved, and this is just this is part for the course. This is why we need to, tear this stuff up root and branch. We need cash to go in there and really reform the FBI, but also for Pam Bondi to reform the Department of Justice from top to bottom. It shouldn't be a politicized department. The scales of justice must be blindfolded. And I gave a floor speech last week on this point. People say, well, Chip, aren't you bothered? There were people who did some things they shouldn't have done on January 6th. I've been very open about that. There were people who did things that were deserving of prosecution. There were doors that were smashed in. There were police officers that were assaulted. There were things that were done. But when you politicize 1,500 prosecution, and when the FBI and the Department of Justice is used to target Americans because you want to have a political result, then you have completely removed the blindfolds from the scales of justice. And that must be the thing that we restore. Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, their charge is to restore the Justice Department and the FBI to actually defend the rule of law. Focus on criminals, focus on the things that you're supposed to do, and work with local law enforcement to restore people's belief in the criminal justice system.
Where do you think the FBI and the DOJ got on the wrong track? Was this politicization just laid bare under Donald Trump's presidency and their reaction to it? Or is this something that's been building since the changes after 9/11 or even earlier?
I think both. I think, when you put that much power and consolidate it in Washington, the founders warned us of that. And that's something that we should be mindful of when we're going through all the spending exercises. One of the reasons I'm taking arrows right now from even some of my Republican colleagues, because I'm standing over here saying, hey, stop spending, stop writing these blank checks to the federal government, is because when you give them that money, they're going to use it. And they're going to use it against us in the end. And then we've seen that unfold. But I do think President Trump laid that bare. I think I think COVID has laid some of that bare. I think the J6 situation laid some of that bare. But importantly, I think we really went sideways when we started making the FBI be about terrorism in the wake of 9/11, because what that did was started to turn the FBI inward in data collection, right? Like, that's really the issue. And you saw Tulsi Gabbard, who was over there today testifying. And what did she did? She defended her position that we should have to have a warrant requirement with respect to FISA, which, by the way, 86 Republicans voted against last spring. We wanted to ensure that warrant requirement would be there. I think that was a mistake by Republicans. I think Tulsi was right to be saying that we need to reform that. And I think that when we had some senators that were questioning her on that, they should be the ones being questioned. We need to protect our civil liberties, and we need to diffuse the power out of the hands of a few. There were so many abuses of FISA by the FBI, 200,000 records that were pulled by the FBI to politically target American citizens. That's all known. And we had the FISA courts for chastising the FBI for the abuses. They tell us, don't worry, Chip, we put in all the fixes. No, we put in some fixes last spring, but not enough. I got an amendment that was adopted that gives us quarterly reports and gives us a right to go before the FISA court to make sure they're doing it the right way. That's good, but we need the warrant requirement and we need more reform. Sorry, I didn't mean to filibuster, but those are all the things we need to do.
Well, that's great. No, you need an agenda. You actually need to be concrete. You can't just shake your fist at the wind and yell that the FBI needs to change without actually going into what needs to change and how you can restore an FBI that people have trusted. The kind of FBI that arrests serial killers, Hannibal Lecters and other types, as opposed to grandmas leaving Austin a few years after trespassing.
And those evil individuals that are moving little girls and little children in the sex trafficking trade. Like, why don't we have the FBI focused on that? Focusing on the dangerous moving of fentanyl that is poisoning our kids. And that's what's happening. Tens of thousands of Americans dead from fentanyl poisoning. Tens of thousands of kids being trafficked, both Americans and, alien children that are being trafficked for profit. Why isn't the FBI focusing on that rather than hunting down a grandma because she crossed a bike rack on January 6th, 4 years ago? Like, that's what is driving the American people crazy. They want to return to not just justice, but common sense.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people were a lot of Trump supporters were excited to see the order that came down from Office of Management and Budget earlier this week that has since been kind of pulled back. Some of the instructions stay in place, cutting funding. The Democrats, of course, went wild. And I think some Republicans, it appeared, really lost their nerves at different pet projects that were getting impacted by this sort of thing. Now, you're not part of Russ vote, as you mentioned, just passed out of committee on Thursday. It
Yeah.
looks like he'll probably get confirmed by the Senate, and then you and House Budget will be one of the groups that get to oversee him. Are you confident that there will be any kind of, or hopeful that there'll be any kind of return to that order, that this thing will be reviewed, that some of the spending will actually be able to be brought back under control under Russ's guidance?
Yeah, of course. First of all, Russ will do an excellent job. He did an excellent job at OMB. I think he's the only guy returning to the literal same job. That's how much confidence President Trump had in him the first go round and does this time. I'm glad that he got through the committee. He will do a great job like reviewing the expenditures. Frankly, I mean, he's going through the confirmation process. That memo went out because it was the right thing to do. Obviously, they pulled that back because you've got the litigation going forward. You got the court that issued an injunction. But I think the message was sent. Frankly, they kind of rope-a-doped them a little bit. Now you got all these groups that have kind of exposed themselves to the ridiculous expenditures because they were crying foul. Well, now we know who a lot of them are. And now we need to go through the executive branch, through impoundment, through the congressional funding process, whether it's appropriations or reconciliation. And we need to pull that money back. Of course, we need to review NGOs. And if anybody disagrees with that, you go campaign on funding NGOs to move illegal immigrants into our country. Like, of course, we need to review a lot of these programs like condoms to people in Afghanistan. I mean, it's insane. So those things, and that's like the peanuts of it, that's the small dollars, but they have a real big impact in terms of people's faith in our government when we're funding these ludicrous programs. And you're funding the very NGOs that weaken us, endanger us, move criminal aliens into our countries where individuals can get killed, like Jocelyn Nungray in Houston and other Americans who have died at the hands of dangerous criminals.
And you took some heat this week because you skipped out in the House conference down in Miami. But I guess maybe true to your expectations, it didn't seem like any kind of a plan was actually agreed on down in Miami, and the Republicans don't seem any closer to figuring out what they're exactly going to do with deportation and border security funding, the tax cuts and the tax reforms, or making the Trump tax cuts permanent. What is next for Congress? Everyone's been focused on what's going on in confirmations, but what is next for the House of Representatives that has to take the lead on this?
Yeah, good question. I mean, first of all, with respect to Miami, look, I decided not to go down there because my wife and my kids had some stuff back in Texas that I needed to take care of for them, and I had some personal responsibilities at home. I told the leadership that if they needed me there, I'd find a way to get there, but that at the end of the day, I knew what was going to happen, and it's exactly what did happen. And I'm not going to go talk about what happened in private meetings. I'm not one of those guys. That wasn't for the public consumption. They had a private conversation. But I will tell you in broad terms, yes, as many have said leaving that meeting, no decisions have been made. They are still kind of going around in circles about how much spending we should cut versus what the tax policy should be. You ask what is next for Congress. What should be next for Congress is to deliver immediately on President Trump's agenda. That's why I favor the two-step process. Let's get border funding done. Let's get some defense funding in place to get drones and to make sure that we have, an Iron Dome for America and all the things the president has a vision for. Let's give Pete Hegseth what he needs. Let's break that apart from the normal town appropriations process where all of the contractors decide our policy instead of our leaders. Let's give Pete those tools. Let's lift the debt ceiling for the president, but let's do it responsibly by pulling some cuts to undo some of the student loan stuff, to make sure we have Medicaid work requirements, to undo the EV mandates and those things, to pay for those things. And then let's have a debate about taxes and spending. But here's my bottom line. We must not increase deficits. We need to reduce deficits. And a lot of my Republican colleagues have never met a tax they didn't want to cut. Agreed. But they certainly have never made a program they don't want to increase. Disagree. I'm on the side of stopping the inflation tax for the American people, and I'm going to stand on that hill, and I'm going to fight for the American people so our kids and grandkids still have a country.
Congressman Chip Roy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. God bless. Take care.
Don't go anywhere. We'll have Chris's grade for week 2 of the Trump administration next. Well, how far will a teacher go to save a kid on the brink of losing everything? From Angel Studios, the studios behind Sound of Freedom, comes Brave the Dark. It's an inspiring true story about a troubled teen that's struggling to survive in a world that's let him down. Haunted by torturous childhood memories, Nate Williams finds himself engulfed in darkness when his drama teacher, Mr. Dean, bails him out of jail and takes him in. And Nate must confront his past before it leads to his own destruction. Brave the Dark reminds us that one meaningful connection can change everything. This powerful film will leave you uplifted and inspired as it shows the strength of compassion and the impact of never giving up on someone. I encourage everybody to go see Brave the Dark. It's in theaters now. Get your tickets today at angel.com/Jill. That's angel.com/Jill. A lot has happened over the course of the past week in Trump world. Chris Bedford is our senior politics editor for Blaze News, and he's here to talk about all of this because he wrote about it in his latest Beltway brief. So, Chris, how do you think the second Trump administration, right? This is now the big new fun stuff. How have they done in this week?
You know, they've done all right, and there were a lot more pitfalls this week than they had previously encountered. With one, there was the order that went out from Office of Management and Budget, which we cheered here, but which was vague. And a lot of the government, a lot of the different apparatchiks and bureaucrats throughout the government, whether for partisan reasons or out of simple incompetence, read too deeply into it and did things like shutting down Medicaid portals, which allow each state has their own Medicaid portal, so those states weren't able to apply for the benefits. And that basically gave Democrats the first bone that they'd had in 6 months to be able to hammer Republicans with. And they did that. You saw that in the different hearings. You saw threats now about Russ Vought's confirmation to actually head the OMB and become its director again. But none of that really actually ended up coming to pass. It ended up becoming a public relations battle. What could have been a hiccup. The order itself was withdrawn, but the orders from the president to cut the different funds that he didn't want stayed in place. It ended up being a stress test in some ways for the federal government to figure out, one, to out the actual problems, to out the agencies that don't seem to know the difference between when they're funding amputees or funding abortions, and to figure out how far the president would be able to go on this. So I think we probably will see some more of that in the future. And in the end, well, the Democrats all decided they weren't going to go and actually even vote in a committee. He passed without their support. He passed with the simple majority, the Republicans who showed up there. And then you had the three main hearings. These ones were the most contentious hearings that we were going to have. You had Tulsi Gabbard, who we had talked about already. You had Kash Patel, and you had RFK Jr. And this was a chance for Democrats once again to sink their teeth into it. I think that Tulsi had a little bit of problem. She's going to get some pushback from her own party. She's still slightly in peril, but the other two look like they're set for confirmation. And at the same time, Washington, D.C. is so self-important and so self-interested. There could be nothing in the world that's more interesting than me questioning RFK and yelling at him about vaccines. But actually, there is something more interesting, and that's the tragedy that happens just 3 miles away from where we are right now in the Potomac, where the United States' attention is completely glued to the biggest aviation disaster since 9/11. Coming home from work late Wednesday night, you could see the sirens. You could see the whole river absolutely filled. And that's what the people are watching. Even NBC's actually delineated nominations channel was covering that wall to wall. And the president's speech on that and whatever steps or missteps he ended up taking on that, the executive orders he's taking on DEI and air traffic control, that's where the focus was. So if you're a Republican who is worried about a contentious week, and you looked at the missteps, and then you looked at what the American people were paying attention to and cared about, and you looked at what the Democrats were able to accomplish, well, you had a pretty successful week.
Yeah, and it didn't necessarily have to be that way. Let's talk about some of the details here. I mean, RFK Jr. is an interesting case because if you had told me a year ago that RFK Jr. was going to, be okay and get through that nomination proceeding in the United States Senate, I would have laughed in your face. I mean, I really would have. The context was different, right? The entire universe was different. It's different times. But RFK Jr. was
seen. We stand on the shoulders of Matt Gaetz.
Yes, maybe so. I mean, because the way it played out, I mean, the biggest meme clip of it was really Bernie making an ass of himself and just being generally hilarious. But explain how you think that happened. Besides, I mean, Gaetz played a part, but it felt like he's the most popular, nominee at this point.
And there's a bipartisan support. So Democrats beclowned themselves in their attacks. when you had the back and forth with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders about taking money from pharmaceutical companies and whether or not pharmaceutical companies ought to be sued. These Democrats who have made a career out of attacking the unaccountable pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies and the hospital systems suddenly find themselves on the complete and total defensive just because of their new idolization of the vaccines and their unwillingness to take any criticism on that. And there were some awkward moments with this. I think Senator Bill Cassidy and Rand Paul got into it a little bit, both Republicans. Bill Cassidy ended up in the ridiculous position of having to explain and defend why doctors tried to give my one-day-old daughter a vaccination for hepatitis B, which affects prostitutes and drug users, heavy drug users, not infant girls. And these sorts of illuminations, combined with, for the first time in my life, ever watching this, in 20 years of watching these hearings, hearing polite applause in the background as opposed to shrieking female activists from Code Pink. Just whenever RFK made a point, there was polite applause. And, senators are the last people to tell when the times are changing. Even the famously apolitical Bob Dylan noticed that the last people to notice things are senators. And they seemed a little surprised at the polite applause. They seem surprised that Republicans are now kind of on this health journey too, as opposed to just dismissing it as a bunch of hippieism. They seem surprised that there's anyone who went through COVID and is now questioning the wisdom and the authority of the medical establishment in this country. And they shouldn't be, but that's the place where we are, and RFK represents that shift so well.
Well, Chris, we usually focus on the Republicans here on the show, but with this Beltway brief that you have out, I want to look at the Democrats and where they are right now, because you would think with the second Trump administration, they would be, throwing fastballs, be ready to go, having all of their clips going out over the evening news. But that's not where we are. So how do you see this going for the Democrats now that Trump is, everybody's like, I think he's kind of cool again. Elon Musk is around him. JD Vance is already having cultural moments already in just as very early stages of a vice president. What are the Democrats left to do right now?
They don't have a lot of options. It's not like Jimmy Kimmel's the cool kid anymore, who's going to come out and just make fun of everyone. Every once in a while, I'm reminded that Jon Stewart's back at The Daily Show, because it's just not remotely part of the cultural conversation like it used to be. In fact, there are very few broad cultural moments left anymore. Basically, the Super Bowl coming up, I think, will be the next time we have a broad cultural shared experience in this country. Democrats' ability to wield their power is kind of defeated. CNN and MSNBC look like they're just yelling at the moon. They kind of look like crazy people at this point. And also, we've kind of passed through this long, dark night where you were not allowed to call out just shrieky, crazy liberal females screaming in your face, like we've seen to J.D. Vance, like RFK went through, like Pete Hegseth went through. And finally, we're at a point as a society where people are really starting to, I think because of this shift in culture, once again say what they feel, call out the things that are obvious. And that is something that puts the Democrats, who've really become hall monitors, like completely and totally power-hungry hall monitors, on the defensive. They're in disarray. They can't seem to figure out. It's unclear who their leader is. They can't figure out which direction they want to go in or which line of attack they're actually going to stick with. They're still talking about January 6th and Russia and Ukraine like it's the most important thing in the world. Their superstar is hamstrung in California by that awful natural disaster, which was largely of him and his colleagues making. So to answer your question, the biggest enemy right now of taking on the deep state, the real people who are going to resist this, aside from the deep state itself, are Republicans. They are the problem.
Yeah, let's talk about them. By the way, I'm not sure I'm going to watch the Super Bowl as opposed to everyone else.
I was almost going to say that.
Since I did watch the AFC Championship,
Bedford.
I'm not sure I will watch the Super Bowl. But the less we say about that, the better.
Probably will.
Maybe.
You like wings and dip, nuts. I mean, come on.
I do, but I mean,
the food is so good.
The only thing I have to root for is maybe Saquon Barkley, but then I have to compartmentalize half my brain. I mean, either the Chiefs or the Eagles. I can't do this. I can't do it.
Are you going to watch the Super Bowl?
Can't do it.
I will definitely watch the Super Bowl.
Yeah, he's the noted non-sports fan here out of the
So
three of us here.
I played football for 6 years,
yeah.
rugby for 4, but I've never
care.
watched really other people play. I go to games, but I will definitely watch this, and I'll have the same kind of plan though that I had for inauguration, which is instead of
Sounds
waiting
fishy
in
here.
freezing cold lines for disappointment and then happiness like you guys did, go to a bar, have a blast.
Well, going to a bar is never a bad idea with real people in real life. But let's talk about those Republicans, though, because you also have been pointing out that the road may not be so smooth forever, because very quickly here we have to talk about actually voting on things and passing legislation. I think it was the job of Congress, written somewhere down in the document a long time ago. They're supposed to pass laws, and it's not clear what that plan is, both in terms of reauthorizing tax cuts and dealing with deportation, et cetera.
I was part of a pretty wild conversation yesterday, just between two old friends who are on different lines of the GOP. One works in taxes and budget, and the other one is, kind of a bomb thrower, someone who's on the American right much more. And the guy who's at budget and taxes is just saying, what do you want? Tell me what the demands are. Why are we having this conversation anymore? And the conservative was saying, well, what do you got? What are you going to give me? And it was just this kind of funny back and forth between two people. And the reality is, it seems like even after this week's retreat to Miami, where the Republicans went down to hammer out a plan and to figure out what they were going to do next, they came out and they say, don't worry, we don't have a plan. We're exactly on schedule. And what usually happens with that is that maybe they split it into two bills. Yeah. They put all of the difficult stuff in the second one. They pass the first one and then never pass the second. Maybe they put taxes. This is just talking through people today on the Hill, trying to figure out, well, what's next? And they just roll their eyes. Oh, my gosh. Like, what could be next? Well, maybe we'll get together the Freedom Caucus and the Main Street Caucus and House leadership. And we'll get toward the budget guys. And we'll all talk about things. We'll trade messages. We'll get nowhere for 6 months. And then, boom, we'll be shocked by a deadline. We'll have to pass something immediately. Businesses won't be able to function. Families won't be able to function. No one knows what's going to happen. And it'll be a disaster. Or maybe it's just one big glorious bill. The point is, after 3 days of hanging out in sunny Miami, which I know can be distracting, House Republicans are no closer to figuring this out. Meanwhile, whenever you ask Donald Trump, well, you want one bill, do you want two bills, you want three bills? He says, I don't care, just get it done. And then you have these stupid political reporters in D.C. saying, Trump is causing chaos by not telling them how to pass who cares? Just get it done. There's no chaos. But there's this weird thing in D.C. where even when people do talk to each other, which is not nearly as often as they should, they're often talking past each other, and there's no sense of urgency until it's too late.
Unfortunate. Can you just, before we go, can you have a counter to just start passing what you can pass? I mean, what's the rationale to say, no, we got to wait and do, one big beautiful bill or whatever? I mean, wouldn't the ultimate, like, however you do it, in other words, start passing things as soon as possible, right? I mean, that would be like the common sense, I think, American, without knowing how everything works. And how do we get that ball rolling?
The ball should be rolling. It should be going right now. The House of Representatives is not doing nominations. They're supposed to be focusing on this, and yet somehow it's not. And I guess the issue that you're going to end up having with that, well, the House of Representatives could pass it. The House GOP will pass border funding, deportation funding, and the tax cuts. They could probably do it tomorrow. But then you've got people like Tillis, or Murkowski, and Collins, and McConnell, who are all supposedly Republicans, hanging out in the Senate. And do they want to put their name on that bill? Well, it doesn't include my special thing. It doesn't include the tax cuts for the company in my state. It doesn't include this thing for my families. It doesn't include this bridge. Well, I don't want to just have my name on something that's icky. Or in Collins' case, Donald Trump lost my state by 7 points. So I'm not just going to pass his agenda one by one. And of course, you're not going to get Democrats on board, which is why that really strange thing is true, that the more crud you put into that big mud ball, the easier it is to go down the hill and just get all the votes it needs.
Deadlines and pet projects. It's going to make D.C. go around, Bedford. We know that. Hey, have a great weekend. Thanks for joining us.
I'll see you next week.
All right. Well, don't go anywhere. We'll have more right after the break. Week 2 of the Trump administration has proved to be most eventful as well. Confirmation hearings still continuing. And my question to you on X earlier today is, do you think that Tulsi Gabbard will be confirmed or not? And 70% of people, Matthew, said that they believe that she will be concerned. Still unsure is the next top vote getter with just around 20%. And then no coming in very, very low. I do like to see that because there are people out there, right? Senator Josh Hawley was saying she may be in jeopardy earlier this week. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, is Tulsi Gabbard, is she too far for the establishment to bring into the fold?
Yeah, look, let's just put the facts on the table. First off, I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is not down with normal Republican foreign policy or what has been considered establishment Republican foreign policy for the last 25 years. And she's made that very clear over time. She said things that probably a lot of different Republicans have disagreed with. I mean, she wasn't a Republican, right? And so she is very unique in this moment. But when it comes to foreign policy in particular, she sort of represents something new. She represents something that's more Trump, more MAGA, more America first. And she's kind of grown into that, and that's kind of grown into her. And everyone who's part of MAGA loves Tulsi for this reason. I mean, Tucker Carlson, other people like that. So she obviously would be your candidate who would be on the cutting edge in normal times in Washington, D.C., because she represents an opposition to one of the most entrenched interests in our fair capital city, which is foreign policy. Billions and billions of dollars revolve around foreign policy. There is a uniparty sort of common understanding. She breaks all of that. I mean, she breaks through all of that. So you would think that she would be really hard to get through. But I would submit to you the lesson of the day is everyone's getting through because MAGA has the momentum.
Well, I love a friend of the show, Eric Prince, earlier this week was saying, well, Tulsi Gabbard, she's absolutely qualified to go through and lead this position. Have you seen the people that Joe Biden put up in his administration? There are actually people that are qualified that were having these arguments over, the level of qualification now because Trump wants them, that they're just trying to deem them unworthy somehow of the office. But Matthew, sometimes the good guys actually do win.
Yes, and this week is a good example of that, and we should talk about that and reflect on this a little bit here at the end of a wild week of all kinds of crazy, twists and turns, but ultimately a solid win for the Trump administration, win after win, really. And just as I was saying about Tulsi earlier, you have to sit back and think what a miracle this would seem if you saw this looking into the future from the vantage point of a year ago. The idea that RFK Jr. would be with the Republicans, the idea that Tulsi would be with the Republicans, the idea that that Kash Patel would be in a position to return and take revenge on an FBI and DOJ that in fact hates him. The idea that Trump, of course, would win in the first place, and that when he got into office, he would move this quickly and, just institute sweeping change right away. This is all a pipe dream a year, 2 years ago. This is all a pipe dream a few years ago before that. This is, in fact, the fulfillment of the mandate that was handed to Trump, not in this year, but in 2016. I mean, this is what people wanted Trump to do in 2016, and it is now happening. So what's the lesson here? When I reflect on this, thinking about everything that happened this week and all the wins for the various people that are part of this coalition, what really strikes me is how everything, nothing happens, and then everything happens suddenly all at once. But it's not a miracle. It's not magic. It's because people like Chris Rufo found out how to use Twitter as a weapon a long time ago and then started to really do things with it, actually hitting targets over and over again and not stopping when it came to DEI, to the point where he even took down the president of Harvard University in broad daylight in front of everybody. All the people who took scalps on these issues taught their fellow Americans, spoke up when, remember, it was not the cool thing to do. It was the brave thing to do. And they did it over and over and over again, even when times were at their darkest. They didn't stop. And then all of a sudden, after the end of all that fighting and all that suffering, boom, all of a sudden Trump wins, right? The assassination occurs. There's some really gnarly couple months, as we say in California. And then all of a sudden the dam bursts open. And now we live in perhaps the beginning of the golden age, but certainly the beginning of an age where all these wins are being reaped, right? We're reaping what people have sown all this time. And that is really instructive. To see that in one's lifetime is a rare lesson that we need to remember as we go about the rest of our life. Because the same is true in all parts of life. That when you face this kind of adversity, good people come together and they keep at it and they keep at it and they keep at it. And sometimes you don't see results at all, but things you thought that were impossible all of a sudden become possible because you kept at it and you kept in the fight.
And you talk about Chris Rufo and DEI, and we were talking about that on the show today as well. The Department of Education will be next on the list. I don't think that you can overstate, though, the taking the pronouns out of the people's bios of the federal government, because I feel that the rest of the business culture will follow suit, because this is now not going to be something that's cool. Pete Buttigieg has also been one of those people that has removed the pronouns from his bio on his X account, right? If it's already to the Pete Buttigieg level, this is infiltrating everyone. And it just goes back to, we can actually reclaim the culture at large, because people have been pushed so far for 4 years, and they've said, you know what? Yeah. I don't want to be told that this man is a woman, and I don't want to have to pretend that Dick Levine is Rachel Levine, and I'm done with all of that stuff. And the pronouns in the bios, to me, is like that absolute nail in the coffin of this madness.
Oh yeah, because it's also one of the most insane parts of it all. I mean, most societies throughout the universe, throughout the world, right, do not engage in that kind of irrational, asinine behavior. It makes no sense. It's crazy. And if someone can get you to say that, that men aren't men and women aren't women, I mean, then what else can they get you to do? Basically anything, including saying it's okay to mutilate children's genitals because of whatever reason. So it's like a nightmare. But what's happened is there's this sudden slipstream for people where they're not persecuted all of a sudden. They have time to reflect, right? And they're looking around going, gosh, this feels really good. I was just talking to a relative last night who was saying, I've realized all of a sudden how I'd been cowed into saying these things, and that, I was thinking I was in a fascist regime where I had to just go along to get by. And now I realize, I was kind of being a coward, or, I was just trying to get by, and we all were doing it. And wow, we just dodged a bullet. And I'm like, yes, my friend. And a lot of people are coming to that realization right now, this very week.
Yeah. Our friend Ali Bestucky has the book called Toxic Empathy. That's what we've been dealing with for so long. And finally, we get to put that to rest. Thanks for watching the show, everybody. We'll be back on Monday to break it all down for you.